invitations for 12 to 15-year-olds to get their COVID vaccines are definitely going to begin next week, after ministers announced the go-ahead last night.
Yes, the government has said parental consent will be needed for a jab, but children competent enough could make their own decision. We asked the people of Huddersfield what they thought.
I think that it's necessary to get the pandemic under control, and I think it's just necessary to move on.
I don't think a 12-year-old will be able to comprehend what that means, to be fair. I don't think they have the facts and fully understand it.
I find that quite worrying because children of that age group aren't very likely to get COVID or really ill from COVID.
That age group, they're more likely to spread it if they're at school. So if they're getting vaccine, then it's like reducing the risk.
Whether that's the choice of the parents or the choice of the children, well, I think there's got to be some balance there. You're not going to force children to have a vaccination if they don't want one, but to my mind, if we're all vaccinated, in my opinion, and that's the safest option.
Well, joining us now to discuss the plans, Professor Devi Sridhar, who is Chair of Global Public Health at Edinburgh University, and also we are joined by Dr. Saleyha, who is an A&E doctor. Good morning to you both. Now, we have already had a very energetic debate about the decision that parents should make in this situation. And, you know, let's set aside parents who are anti-vax, because they have their own views about vaccinations, and we know what those are. For parents who are very supportive of vaccination, who have had the vaccination themselves, Dr. Hassan, can you appreciate that this is a tougher decision when it comes to their child than when it came to them?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I have nieces and nephews, and I know that we will be erring on the side of offering them the vaccine if they agree to have it. But I don't envy at all the plight of parents on making this decision. I think what's going to help them is being armed with the facts and not having the narrative diluted by people who are absolutely anti-vax. But it is about having the clear facts and understanding what the risks are. I don't think that the current messaging that's been coming from government and from the experts has been helpful, because there's been conflicting advice. Last week, the JCVI was saying that they're not going to recommend it on health matters, on risk, on medical risk benefit versus advantage alone. But they left it to the CMOs to make that decision. And obviously, they've come up with the alternative view that it will be of wider benefit for the children and for their education, but also for the wider community. So I think that places parents in a massively difficult position, but being armed with the facts is going to be key.
Let's talk about the facts then. I mean, I think most parents would look at the wider social implications of vaccines in terms of themselves, but when it comes to your kid, you just look at your kid. That's all you think about when you put your head on the pillow at night, the risks to them. So let's set aside the broader social benefits. Let's talk about the risk factors or otherwise here. Would it be a fair summary, please tell me if I'm wrong about this or right about this, would it be a fair summary to say that the risks to your child of developing side effects, and specifically this hopefully short-term and mild effect on the heart of the jab, are much lower than the risks of developing problems if they don't have the jab? Is that a simple summary of the situation?
So with COVID, again, I know we've been living with it for nearly over 18 months or so, and we are learning how it impacts us every day. New evidence, new research. What we do know, myocarditis and pericarditis is a small side effect that has been seen in very few numbers of people who have had the vaccine, but it's also a risk from getting COVID itself.
It's a bigger risk, isn't it? It's a bigger risk if you get COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bigger risk if you get COVID, and it's a small, but it's not a zero risk from the vaccine, but it's a much smaller risk. COVID also, again, in this patient group, 12 to 15-year-olds, long COVID is less, you've got less chance of developing it than you are for an adult, but it's not absolutely zero. So about 15%.
As a parent, as I put my head on the pillow tonight, as I consider what I'm going to do for my teenager next week, I can tell myself with absolute certainty that if my child does not get the single vaccine, the risks to their heart specifically are greater if they get COVID if they hadn't had the vaccine. But if they have the vaccine, the risks are lower. In fact, we've just had some figures in from the States, which, as you say, the evidence is still coming in. We're in very early days with COVID. But it seems to show that the risks to boys in particular, if they don't have the vaccine, of developing heart problems because of COVID, if they get COVID, are 6 times higher than if they have the vaccine. So we are seemingly getting quite convincing evidence for this being relatively safe.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think within medicine, nothing is absolutely risk-free. I mean, at work, I do it all the time. I explain the risks versus the benefit to patients on a number of procedures, and ultimately, it's the patient consent that allows us to continue to treat them. But with COVID, again, we were in the dark every single day. We are learning new evidence. But one thing is for sure, COVID kills. COVID gives a number of the nasty side effects that we're talking about now in far greater numbers than the vaccine.
OK, Professor Sridhar, I think, you know, as Dr. Hassan has said, the mixed messaging on this has not been helpful for parents, with the JCVI saying they would stop short of recommending a full rollout because the vaccine only provided a marginal health benefit, and then the chief medical officers saying, no, we're going to roll it out because it also has a broader benefit to society. But that figure that Dr. Hillary mentioned earlier about the greater risk of this particular problem in this age group from COVID compared to the risk of getting one dose, that, to me, seems the compelling piece of evidence, and I'm surprised that that hasn't featured more highly in both the JCVI messaging and the Chief Medical Officer's messaging.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing to realize now is that this is a problem facing every country across the world, and so we have to look globally. And if you look at the United States, that's been the clear messaging from the Centers for Disease Control. Canada, Israel, France, Denmark, Singapore, even Australia and New Zealand are rolling out jabs, though they have very much lower numbers than we do, because they're saying that the risks to a child themselves are higher of getting COVID than of getting the vaccine. And it's also long COVID. We don't have great estimates, but 1 in 7 is one of the estimates of prolonged symptoms. And I guess even personally, every virologist I know, whether it's in Germany or in France or in the States or Canada, have gotten their child vaccinated as soon as they've become eligible. It hasn't been something they've struggled with. It's been, actually, I want to protect my child as fast as possible.
Because the messaging that came out yesterday was broadly, this is going to be good for society. This is going to be good for schools because it means that fewer children will get COVID and there is less chance that the school will have to close or that so many children will miss out on education. And those are all magnificent benefits. But as Richard said, as a parent, you're only concerned about your child, primarily. You know, that's what you're doing, is protecting your child. And so this risk has to be balanced, doesn't it? So it's really important, and we're going to talk to the vaccines minister a little bit later on, about how they get this messaging right. And then there is another, Professor Sridhar, there is another issue, isn't there? The children will all have been listening to this information, and so whatever their parents think, whose decision is it? If you're in the vaccination room and the parent has said, yes, I consent, but the child decides not to, does the child have the right to say no, or vice versa? The child wants it, the parents don't. What happens then?
Yeah, these are really complex decisions, and I have to say that the mixed messaging hasn't helped. I personally think part of it is because they were so late with the decision. Like this, we have had the same evidence that other countries have had since May and June, and those countries ran ahead because they knew the school year was coming and started vaccinating their children. There hasn't really been new evidence that's come up in the UK's shift in position. So I think part of that is why we have the mixed messaging. They're trying to explain to people why they're doing something now they didn't do 2 months ago.
I have to say, listening to all the debate we've had so far on the programme, Dr. Hillary earlier, the two of you here, I mean, I'm very fortunate. My children are way past this now. My youngest are in their early 30s. If I had teenage children, and I have to say I haven't made my mind up about this until today's programme, I think I would be going to bed tonight thinking they're going to have the jab.
Yeah.
They're going to have the jab next week, because it seems to me that there is no logical argument for them not to have the jab and plenty of logical argument for them to have the jab. Fair summary?
Yeah, I'm really pleased to hear that, Richard, and I'm glad that we've helped steer your thought process in that way. When I keep hearing people saying that there's absolutely zero risk for children to get COVID, and if they get COVID, then it's really mild, I think about India, Brazil and Indonesia, where there are vast numbers of kids who are extremely sick and dying from COVID, and not only from COVID, but from the associated illness, the paediatric multisystem inflammatory syndrome. So there is a lot that we are still learning as we go along. Children are not 100% immune from getting very, very sick from COVID or illnesses related to COVID.
Yeah, but sometimes... sorry, Susanna.
Sorry, Richard. I was going to say, I have a child in the 16 to 17 cohort, and as we know, that's just the single jab was offered to those quite recently, and a child in the 12 to 15 cohort. So, Professor Sridhar, my 17-year-old has had the single dose. I'm wondering whether, as a parent in the situation of the child 12 to 15, because it's going to be often in classrooms, how many parents, I wonder, do you think might say, do you know what, I'll leave it up to you? And would that be a sensible thing to do? Or, as a professor of global public health, is this something that parents should impress upon their children the importance of?
Well, I think knowing the 12 to 15-year-olds in my life, I would say that actually you can't really force much upon that age group. I think it's more about a discussion with them to, explain the risks, explain the benefits, explain also, what's happening across the world. Millions of their friends or family members abroad might have already had the vaccine. In some ways, I think kids can be more progressive than we think and lay it out for them of actually what does this mean for them. But I think the exciting thing on the horizon to mention, even for parents of younger kids, is it looks like Pfizer is going for approval of a vaccine of 5 to 11-year-olds in the United States in October. So this is going to be the next issue on the horizon, which is now once we deal with 12 to 17-year-olds, what do we do now with the under 12s?
OK. Thank you both very much indeed. Personally, I found that clarifying.